Hi, this video is going to be one part of a two-part series. Ultimately, the goal is to be able to connect your EC2 instances to be able to utilize the managed Active Directory that's offered in Azure. But in order to do that, you have to connect the two and using a Site-to-Site VPN is a common approach. So that's what this video is about. So if you can see in the diagram, you have your Azure network over here, AWS network over here. It can join the AD via the site-to-site. So let's get started. Okay, so the first step is to create a resource group. We'll go ahead and name it intra-domain services, which is what we have here in the instructions. Review and create. Hit create. Next is to create the virtual network. Just have to search for it. That's the network gateway. We actually want the virtual network. We'll go ahead and name the virtual network what we have here, copy and paste. And then we create the subnets. We'll create the first main subnet after setting the entire network address space. And we'll give it a name. We don't want default. We'll just call it subnet 1 or 01. And you'll notice I have the numbers bold on the instructions. And that is just to let you know for that step, those are the important things to copy and paste. Now we're going to add the gateway subnet. The gateway subnet is useful in that it helps us connect to, it makes the connection across the network. So we'll go ahead and deploy that. We have our gateway subnet, we have our subnet 01. Next is our virtual network gateway. I'll select the virtual network gateway, create that. Let's call it VNG Azure AWS. And the defaults are okay in this case. You have to make sure your region's the same, but as well. So make sure that you're paying attention to which region you're using. We're also going to have to create a public IP address. And so PIP, public IP address. And then for the configuring BGP, just put disable for both. We're not doing that for this particular video. So create the virtual network gateway. At this point, we're going to pause the video because it's going to take a while. Okay, at this point, we're going to create the VPC. And I like to use the VPC in more because it allows you to make the VPC more easily. Just kind of automates it. We're just going to use one AZ at this point. We are going to stick with one public subnet. Don't want to make this more complicated. It's not the point of the video. And we're going to create when you use this, you should specify the same subnet as in the instructions. It makes it easier down the road, since that makes the instructions reliable and in sync with this VPC. So the VPC is created. Now we can move on to the next part of this, which is to create the customer gateway. Now this customer gateway needs to point to our public IP address from Azure. And so that's what we're going to do now. I like to add the BGP ASN number that's in the JSON that comes with the resource JSON for our virtual network gateway. I do that mostly out of habit. You don't need to do that for this, but if you ever change your mind and you want to use border gateway protocol, you'll be able to. You won't have to destroy your current customer gateway. So this IP address that's being specified here is the public IP address. It's also the tunnel IP address for Azure. So we can grab that, we put that in the customer gateway, and that's going to help tell the customer gateway side of this, that is the external facing IP address in Azure. So we create the customer gateway. We got our customer gateway built. Now we got to create the virtual private gateway. And this is, we'll just name it the way it's set up. Not a lot to it. It does take a little while for it to get into the ready state. Well, I shouldn't say ready, but it'll first be unattached. That's what we really want to see, and then we attach it to a VPC. And so that's what we're waiting for, and there we go. It's attached. Now we can attach it to the VPC we just created. And there you go. And it takes a little while. And I'll typically obsessively hit refresh over and over again. Come on. You can do it. Okay, now it's attached. We can start the next section, which is to create a VPN connection. We select the virtual private gateway we created, the customer gateway we created, and then we're doing static routes, not border gateway protocol. So we take our Azure ADDS subnet, and that's it. And I'm just going to go in here and kind of show you the relationship. Because if you notice, it's a 10.0.1. It's not the entire CIDR of the network that we created. So you can see there 10.0.10-24. And so this is basically the connection that you're trying to make. We're trying to connect this tunnel to that subnet in Azure. All right, so the tunnels, you don't have to do anything. You can keep all of the settings, at least for this. You could You may want to tweak them if you ever do this in production. But for now, just leave them as their defaults. And so the goal here is to wait for this to get into a ready state. The tunnels aren't going to work yet until we finish the networking process. But yeah, so it does take a few minutes for this to get into the correct state. As you can see, both tunnels are down. At this point, we can at least get the configuration. Yeah, and for this, we're just grabbing the generic. We're just doing generic vendor, generic platform, software is vendor agnostic. IKEV2, there's no reason to use IKEV1. You just have to keep that in mind, which one you choose when you actually go and set up the tunnel in Azure. So the next step is to create a local network gateway in Azure. And like always, you have to make sure you're creating it in the correct resource group. So this is our local network gateway. And there's two IP addresses here that we have to be concerned about. One is the external, it's the external outside IP address, and that's your, it's going to be this thing to remember: outside IP address, virtual private gateway, and that's what goes in the first box. And then the next is the actual subnet CIDR from AWS that we just created. And again, border gateway protocol is not being used, so we don't have to worry about that. Next step after that is to create the actual connection on the virtual network gateway. And this is always the fun part, because if you made any mistakes in configuration, you won't get a connection. So this is where you actually figure out if you typed something wrong, which happened to me many times when going through this. So we're doing a site-to-site. We'll just call it connection 1. The reason why there's a number there is because you could do the second one. It's in the instructions. We're not going to do it in the video because it's already long enough. But yeah, so we grabbed the pre-shared secret. See that IKEV2, it's there. And so keep that in mind when you're doing your IKE protocol. Everything else is just defaults. So go ahead and do review and create. All right, this is where it gets exciting. If we did everything correctly, we should start to see that first tunnel. And you notice that outside IP address there. That first tunnel should turn to green. And that corresponds to the tunnel 1 inside of the download configuration. And now it takes a few minutes. But I have noticed, interestingly enough, that see, there you go. AWS is quicker, or very quick, when it comes to recognizing whether or not the tunnel's up or down. For whatever reason, and I'm not sure why, but Azure seems to take a long time to do that. So, you'll hit refresh a bunch of times. You won't see it. It generally takes a couple minutes. And at this point, we just have to wait for that connection. But we could go ahead and just start on the route table while we're waiting. And so this is an important step. You want to be able to route your traffic. So any traffic that would normally be under the CIDR of the Azure CIDR block should get routed to your transit gateway. So that's what we got to do. We want to take that Azure subnet, which is at 10.0.1, and then we go to our virtual private gateway, and that'll just make sure that the traffic gets routed correctly. I think I said virtual private gateway. And hopefully by then, well, it still hasn't kicked in. It's crazy how long it takes for the Azure side to register. We could try, I don't know, maybe we can see if it'll activate faster in a different window or something. Yeah, still unknown. Tricky. Yeah, kind of. Oh, there we go. Finally. Okay, so it's connected now. That's great. Now we can test that connection. Like I said, the instructions allow, or I should say, they show you how to do both tunnels. But just to prove that this works, let's just create a VM and let's test that connection. I tend to like Ubuntu for this kind of stuff, and we'll just give it a name. Azure 2 AWS tester. And yeah, B1s are fine. They're cheap. Make sure you tear down everything that you create after you're done. Let's see. Yeah, and I like the default key pair name that it provides. That's always nice. Azure 2 AWS tester key. Looks like it just grabs, maybe it just grabs the name of the VM. That's smart. That's a good way to do it. I might have missed it. What I'm looking for right now is I'm trying to find the place where you can set the network. Security type. That's it. All right. I'm looking for standard security type. That's important, just because the other security types, they add more rules. And for this particular one, I want to explicitly set those rules so that you see what rules are needed in order to establish a connection between AWS and Azure and vice versa. So that's launching now. That's great. We got our first test machine, and we got a SSH key in order to get into that machine. So that while that's launching, we'll go ahead and say that we're going to do the same thing in AWS. We're going to launch a VM and you download the key. And a mistake that I've made in the past, and part of the reason why I only did one public subnet in this network, is a frustrating thing you can end up doing is picking the wrong subnet when you set up your tunnel. You'll never connect, but it seems like you did everything right. Done that several times. We'll just create a new key pair. Give it I don't know. I like the naming convention from Azure, so maybe I'll use something similar here. And then we'll just put that into a special folder so that they're all together when we're setting up our, connection. Oh yeah, that's right. We also got to do our security group. And so something that I've noticed is that it will auto-assign a private. It won't auto-assign a public IP address, and without it, you're not going to be able to SSH into the machine. So don't forget that part. It's important. Yeah, everything else can be pretty much default. All right, this is an important detail. We need to allow for a ping to be able to access this EC2 instance. You notice we already changed the routing for this in the route table. Now we need to allow it via the security group. And so we'll take the subnet where the other VM is residing, and we'll put that here. We just put a nice little note so it's apparent what we're doing. Ping from Azure subnet. All right, great. So now let's go to our network settings in our Azure VM. And so we want to create an import, and we want to do the same thing. It's not as easy for me to navigate this. I'm getting better, but it's like sometimes hard to remember whether or not like where do I even set the CIDR. And so as it turns out, it's under destination, but I always forget that. So you add the AWS CIDR to the destination IP. And that will allow inbound ping from the AWS network. But you also have to allow outbound pinging. And so we're just going to say this VM can ping to anything. AWS, it comes standard. You can ping anywhere. You can reach anything with the outbound. So there's now there's outbound and inbound rules created for both our AWS and our Azure. And so now let's see if this worked. Let's see if we can connect between EC2 and the VM in Azure. Something to remember is you got to make sure that you set your PEM keys to 600. Typically, when you download it, they're a bit more wide open than that, and you will get errors when you go to SSH. All right, let's get the public IP address for our AWS EC2. We got the PEM key. Oh yeah, it's Ubuntu, not EC2 user, because we use the Ubuntu machine. And then we need the public IP address for our Azure machine. But you'll notice the private IP address here is 10.0.14. That'll be important when we go to ping. Okay, we're in AWS, and we should be able to double check the IP. So, all right, it's a 172. That makes sense. Oh, wait a minute. We didn't actually log in to the Azure side. So now we got to log into the Azure VM, but I don't think that public IP address looks right. That looks like something I copied earlier. But I don't know. Let's try it. Nope. Maybe the public IP address is wrong. Oh, it's actually for the AWS EC2. Interesting. Lots of places to copy and paste incorrectly. Let me tell you. Done it many times, including this time. Now we just need the public IP address for the Azure VM. I almost called the Azure VM an EC2 because I'm so used to AWS terminology. Okay, cool. All right, we are in. So we got our Azure VM, and we have our AWS EC2. Oh, and the ping works. Awesome. Now let's see if the ping works on Azure to AWS. And it's working. This is fantastic. All right, great. Okay, so now that hopefully, if you do that a couple times, you get faster at it. I always recommend practicing. But in this case, this is part one of part two of being able to establish a connection between your AWS resources and the managed Active Directory service provided by Azure. So I hope you enjoyed this video. So we'll see you in the next one. Thanks.